0, no injuries necessary to respond with deadly force, not a cut on a finger. The statute is clear, reasonable fear of bodily harm.
That is Zimmerman defense attorney Mark O'Mara there explaining in his closing argument what the standard is for self-defense in Florida, in part thanks to Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law. That leads to one of the two bigger questions that we have for the impact of the Zimmerman case and the verdict beyond the trial. Will this lead to a re-examination of Stand Your Ground and other gun-related issues? And first of all, I'm curious if anybody thinks there's any question that Stand Your Ground provides a wider latitude for self-defense claims. I mean, it's not, you were definitely threatened, you know, under penalty of injury or death, but that you thought you were. That's beyond what other states like New York have, correct?
Well, it should be a reasonable belief, first of all, and in New York, you'd have to be able, you could respond with the amount of force necessary. You can't go above and beyond that. I think it just makes it so subjective, though, that it's hard to ever have a real standard, and it actually lends itself to someone who's interested in killing someone, to setting that person up and saying, well, you know, I was in my yard, I didn't have to retreat.
Dorian, I'm curious if you, I'm sort of convinced that Stand Your Ground leads to you know, more violent encounters because it provides protection for shooters and gun owners in questionable cases. And I'm wondering if you're of the same opinion on that.
Yes. I was scared is not a defense for murder. In this case, you have a dead, unarmed teen. And if the Stand Your Ground law means that Zimmerman was justified in shooting an unarmed teen who inflicted maybe superficial injuries, we just heard, then I think people are going to seriously re-examine that law after this case, whatever happens.
Why don't you think, Dominic, that's gotten as much attention up through this point? I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot of people are talking about the Stand Your Ground law.
That's an excellent question. I really don't know. I think that's one for the lawyers. But if you're asking me from a political point of view, I really don't know the answer to that. But I just don't see the scenario. It just brings me back to the point again of I just don't see this guy walking out of that courtroom. I mean, the experts can tell us, you know, what this appears to be. And, you know, I agree that murder, too, the prosecutors blew that. But what's amazing, and the defense attorneys, they did a good job. But he basically said that, you know, that Zimmerman didn't instigate this situation. Well, do you mean before you got out the car and they told you not to do it? Or do you mean after they told you not to get involved? How do you get away from that? In the jury, we don't know. It could take one holdout on the jury. Right. Either way. We don't know. But you know, okay, Zimmerman's the greatest guy since sliced bread, but they told you not to get out your car. Lord, a 911 operator said, quote, we don't need you to do that. And you did it anyway, being a cowboy. And now you want the Lord to protect you after you were a cowboy and reckless and took someone's life? It's not going to fly. It's not going to fly.
The jury instructions that the judge gave indicate that the jury has to, in order to acquit him, they have to find that Zimmerman reasonably believed that serious or great bodily harm was going to come to him, or he might die if he didn't, you know, shoot his gun to kill Trayvon Martin. So even with the Stand Your Ground law, they still have to show that he reasonably believed it was necessary to commit this killing.
And to follow on that, again, the jury's going to have to, well, the jury will be aware that Zimmerman had a gun the entire time, knew that he was armed, and actually pursued Trayvon Martin. And the testimony was that Trayvon Martin tried to get away from him. He was running away from him, according to one of Zimmerman's earlier statements. Zimmerman later said, well, he wasn't running, he was kind of skipping. Right. A person skipping away from you is not necessarily the person you think is going to cause you grave harm. And beyond that, going back to what was discussed earlier, the police suggested did he not follow them. So why are you following this person who's running away from you toward the exit? actually, toward the exit of the complex.
I want to move on to the other wider aspect of this, which is unavoidable in this case, and that's race. It's Trayvon Martin, black, George Zimmerman, white or Hispanic, depending on whatever your view of him is. Dominic, you've talked before about what you think would be an outrage in the black community if he's acquitted. Do you still feel that way? Are you still worried about the reaction within the black community if George Zimmerman walks?
I pray that I'm wrong, but if Mr. Zimmerman is acquitted, there will be a couple of reactions. The NAACP is going to start a massive national mobilization. If you think they marched before for Trayvon Martin, you ain't seen nothing yet if Mr. Zimmerman is acquitted. Now, if he's acquitted, that's the court system that we have. It's over and done with. You know, we have to wait and see if the feds decide to bring a civil rights case. They oftentimes, more than not, do not. But if he's acquitted, it's not going to play well. Now, I know there are other issues about black-on-black crime and crimes that African Americans commit, and that's a real problem. I'm not excusing that, but we're talking about this case right now. Right. And in this case, this is as easy as they come for the black community. If there's no conviction in a case like this, when will there ever be a conviction?
You know, when we're talking about race in relation to this case, it's never just in a vacuum. And I want to show you something that made the rounds on Facebook the other day, and it's a little hard to see, but it basically says Joe's Crab Shack waitress, 24-year-old, gives her name, murdered by three, and it uses unflattering terms to describe the three men who have been convicted, I guess, in the case. Funny how this isn't front page news like the Trayvon Martin shooting. And it just strikes me that this is not just, there are white folks who feel victimized in some cases by the attention that this case has gotten, and you're nodding your head, Mayo. You don't look like you're all that surprised by it.
No, not at all. And it's unfortunate because you can pick any case. There are cases all over the country. There are tragedies, unfortunately, that happen every single day. And if you want to find whatever it is that's different in dealing with the people who are involved, you can pit people against each other in any number of different ways. You can look at cases in Westchester County where the victim is African American and the defendant is white, vice versa. However, most of these cases, the perpetrator is not indicative of what's in the hearts of their larger community. And that's the problem, is that we should not allow George Zimmerman to be the voice of Hispanics or white people. We should not allow Colin Ferguson to be the voice of African Americans and he goes and does something that's a horrible act. And hopefully you don't defend someone just because that person shares your race or they share your gender or whatever it may be. You look at conduct and we look at it as the individual.
You know, it's funny. We've had cases and issues in the last few weeks, the Voting Rights Act or the affirmative action case that has come down from the Supreme Court, where people actually argue that, you know, racial issues seem to be to a lesser degree in this country than they've been in years past. And then you get a case like this where it seems to divide people again. Is this just a reminder to everybody that, you know, there's still a lot of unresolved stuff in this country?
Without a doubt, definitely. If you think about it, the jurors are going to be putting themselves in a position of what it was like that night faced with Trayvon Martin. And you have a black man that, yeah, they're saying he's a kid, but he's 17 years old. He doesn't have a I'm 17 years old on his forehead. And, you know, the jurors, there are 5 of 6 jurors are white. What are they thinking when they're analyzing the situation? Are they, you know, there's the fear of black people, is that an issue for the jury? I mean, this is really what it's going to come down to, and it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of where America is today.
One of the issues is the fact that they talk about why the young lady wasn't front page with the 3 men that killed her or are charged with killing her. But the men were prosecuted and arrested. Initially, Trayvon Martin, Zimmerman wasn't even arrested.
That's
so it took months before he was arrested. And the country, unfortunately, has a history of African Americans being victimized and there being no consequences, and occasionally even having the governor come in and tell the jury, do the right thing.
Dorian, I want to give you the last word on this.
Yeah, I don't think it's a race thing. I think it's a decency thing. Again, you have a dead teenager, and if I were on the jury, you know, you mentioned the jury imagining what they would do if Trayvon Martin were over them. But, you know, if a person bigger than me were hitting me, I'd be really scared. But I also wouldn't shoot him, and I also wouldn't have gotten out of the car in the first place when 911 told me not to. And I think the jury will think about that a lot, too.
I just wanted to say, Andrew, for those 3 men, assuming that they did it and they've been convicted, I know others may not feel this way, but from my perspective, they should spend the rest of their natural lives in jail. They took that woman's life. Black crime is a major problem in America. And I agree with you. Those 5 whites on that jury, they, you know, and this is why I tell black youngsters, turn that hat around your head and wear it properly. Pull those jeans up on your backside. You cannot make yourself a target for law enforcement or anyone else, or for the natural stereotypes that always come that are associated with black males. And in our community, our leadership, which has not done much on this issue, we've got to turn this around. It should be about academics and not looking like a thug.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, as this case continues, we will revisit this in the days to come as we wait for a verdict. Richard, thank you very much for joining us. Up next on RFL, the week of Elliot. Elliot, who, you ask? You didn't need to ask this guy. Elliot Spitzer's week began with a surprise, and it ends with a spot on the ballot and a trip to L.A. We'll tell you why next.